Well, thank you so much for being here,
Well,
Dr. Banjac.
Thank you, Hannah.
So, I just want to first tell everybody how we got connected and what this interview is about.
Okay.
Because you already know how much I admire you and have learned from you over the past year. So I really want them to have the opportunity to do the same. So about a year ago, I was in the MBA program here at NDC, and one of the first courses, well, actually the first course, was called Leadership, and Dr. Banjac was my professor. Not only is she the professor, she's the director of the program, correct?
That's correct.
Yes.
Yes.
So it was in that course that I learned, a whole new concept of leadership, and what we really studied was how you can improve leadership to improve, business production, basically, and help reach organizational goals and objectives, right? Would you say?
Yes.
So we read a book called The Leadership Challenge, and I loved reading that book, but what I loved more was learning about your story. So Dr. Banjac, I learned quickly, she has been such a strong woman in leadership. Early on, she told us about how you started a business, and we'll get more into detail about this. Started earning titles of being a president of a college, now director of a master's program. So you're just amazing. And so
thank you.
Today's about learning about you and how you got there. So thank you. We're so excited.
Well, no, and thank you. It's an honor to be here. And when I saw you, I was tearing up because you made your own, you had a goal, you had a vision, and you made it happen. And you were the leader. You're a strong leader, and I respect that you're here and that you've made your dreams come true, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're gonna get started. We're gonna go through some questions.
All right. Great.
And the first thing I want to ask you is take us back to the beginning of your career. Where did it all begin for you?
Well, I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to talk about higher ed, but I can also mention later about business entrepreneurship as well. So in higher education, I've been in higher ed since the mid 80s. And the moment that I made the decision to be in higher ed, I was probably 20. And I had a professor of psychology, and she was a young psychology professor in her 20s. And I looked at her one day and I thought, I'd like to do that. I'd like to be her. So I decided right then and there that I was going to be her. But how life goes, it doesn't necessarily come to fruition immediately. So later on, I was like you, Hannah. I was in an MBA program taking finance, and my professor came up to me and said, would you like to teach a finance course at Tri-C and Cuyahoga Community College? And because I did well in the finance course, and no one there, no full-time faculty member wanted to teach it because it was an odd time during the day. So I said, okay. So on a Friday, I walked in, they gave me this crumpled up syllabus in an old book and said, here you go, start on Monday. Okay. So I went ahead and did that. So it was kind of, the dream came forward. And then from there, I just kept going in my career, and I went from part-time to full-time. They told me that 400 people had applied for this position, full-time faculty there, and I was fortunate to get it.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome. Now, so after that, you went on and you've earned, your master's, your PhD. Tell us a little bit about that experience. What kind of pushed you to continue your education there and get those higher degrees?
Well, that's a good question. Sometimes it's hard to really say like what was motivating me, but I always think it's because I always loved school. And some people like yourself have many talents like athletic abilities and all that, but my big thing was school, and I loved school. So I think I just kept absorbing learning. I wanted to advance, and I wanted to do more, and I wanted to lead and create something better for this world. So I kept thinking, all right, I'll just keep going. I'll keep going. And that's what I did for my MBA. And then my PhD took 10 years to complete with kids and everything. And one day in my PhD, I was working really late at night with the statistics and all that. And I said, I had enough of this. I'm done. I'm not going to continue this program. So I told my son, he was 8 years old at the time, eating cereal in the morning. I said, honey, I decided I'm going to have more time for you because I'm going to stop the PhD program. And my son, little rascal, he said to me mid slurp of the cereal, Mom, I thought you told us never to quit what we started. Oh boy, okay. So that just put the kibosh on that idea. So I kept going, but I was frustrated because it's a lot handling kids and working. And I had my own business then, a technology company, and doing the PhD too, like it was a little bit a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, yeah.
Yeah. So I know you go back into thinking about the beginning of your career, you know, and you think about all your roles and the leadership roles you had. Is that something that you envisioned for yourself early on?
No.
Okay.
Absolutely. How about that? No, not at all. I never thought of myself as a leader.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But I just kept leading anyways.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah. So,
Adapting to the situation. Okay. And so you and I, you know, you were talking to me about this before, about being a natural born leader or not being one. And I think this is a good lesson for kids to learn, especially like my athletes, is not everybody is like has those leadership qualities right from the start.
Yes.
But you can learn from your different experiences, and you can acquire certain skills. And that's kind of, you know, where you're coming from, is you learned as you went.
Yes, that's absolutely true. That's not something I perceived of myself. I always saw my younger sister, as being a leader. She was like you in many ways, athletic, outspoken, and all those things. So I saw her as the leader of the family. But it turned out that I was able to somehow navigate.
Awesome.
And kept going.
That's awesome. So you already talked about, you know, inspiration a little bit was your love for education.
Yes.
And you talked about your mentor kind of already when you first began, and you're like, I want to be like her.
Right. Yes.
Now that you've talked about all your roles a little bit, kind of take us through your roles one more time. You know, you talked about when you first went into education, and then we talked about your PhD. You slightly mentioned the business you started. So can you tell us all the different roles you have filled up to this point?
Yes. All right. I'll just finish up the higher ed, and then I'll go into the business.
Okay.
How's that? All right.
Sounds perfect.
So one of the things I have laying here on my desk is an article that I was cleaning out of my archives here, and it's an article showing a college or university president being handcuffed because he's going into jail. He was being put into jail for the day. And the reason I was going to show that is because I was appointed as the interim president to take over for this kind of situation. It was the oldest college in the city of Cleveland. It was founded in 1848. It was a business school. And so that was, I think, my highest level of achievement in higher ed, as I was served as this interim president and had to deal with all kinds of political and student and faculty unrest all at once. So it was kind of a challenge. And I've held various roles as dean and administrator, and also business professor. So through all of it, I've experienced a lot of joy and movement forward, but also there's been many challenges and different things. As far as my business is concerned, it goes back to school. When I was taking a class and I attended a liberal arts college, just like Notre Dame, I remember there was a class I took, and it was about small business and entrepreneurship. And this was way back in I think early 80s. And the professor said that this was very unusual that they have a class like this, because most colleges refused to teach at that time entrepreneurship because the corporations didn't want people to start their own business. They wanted them to be employees. So he kind of intrigued me. And my family never had a business, except my dad did some electronic repairs and so forth, but it wasn't really a legit business. And I decided to start my own business. And how I started was I went to these large corporations and said I could do an analysis for you. And I made business cards with the business name on it. I never said I was president, because I knew they wouldn't take me seriously, because I was in my 20s. So I thought they would never take me seriously. And I did all these projects for free, and then they gave me references, and then I started consulting, and it was really challenging. And I had other businesses I started too, and one we sold to an investor. So it was a technology company and training company. Wow. But that's really interesting. When you're an entrepreneur, as you know, you have to wear, one minute you're high level dealing with a board or dealing with this, and the next minute, you're mopping up stuff on the floor. And,
doing the dirty work.
Right, or going out to get lunch because you're trying to get some vendors to come in. You got to buy them something for lunch. So, all kinds of things. So that's what's exciting about it. Yeah.
What's been your favorite position so far? Favorite role that you've served?
Ooh, that's a good question. I truly believe that it was, that's a tough question, because I like so many aspects of everything. But I think it was at Myers, because it was a small college, and we really were really building up and doing all kinds of very exciting things. So I think it was my role there until I got to be the interim president, and it was kind of like very challenging at that time. But I think that was my, because we really integrated with businesses too, because that was my dissertation was about collaborating between business and higher ed, because I see that higher ed was too far away from the business world, and we need to integrate, especially in the business major, not in liberal arts. But yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So now we're gonna shift a little bit and go more into leadership and learn more about your perspective on it. So I want to ask, what have you learned through all your experience about your leadership style? So if somebody, asked you to describe it, what would that sound like?
All right, so the best way to describe this would be that I see myself as a chef, making and a chef has to have a real clear vision of what it is he or she is trying to make for the evening dinner or for the what meal at hand or whatever it may be. So that chef must know how to pull together all kinds of various ingredients, and just like human beings are ingredients, and so you should never. I learned that you should always get to know your ingredients, get to know people, and when to leverage that talent and when not to, and what those other ingredients are like. So that this is my real philosophy is really get to know people and understand how they can help in that vision, creating that vision, and how they can contribute to it, and never take anyone for granted. Listen to everyone. You may disagree with them, and they may be wrong, but it's still it's that's how you do things. So you understand, and you bring people together. That's been my experience.
And I totally can see that, from being able to be your student. And I know. When I first came in, when you just said, listen to everyone, we go back to whenever I came in and presented, I thought, hey, something's wrong with the schedule here. You took time to listen to me, hear me out. I always felt like you valued what I was saying, and you always supported the vision I had for myself. And, you're very, you genuinely cared about me as a person. So everything you just said, like you have completely demonstrated, at least with me. So that's awesome. And I've learned, when we read the leadership challenge, I remember, one of the last chapters, it was in the beginning and the end. The beginning, it talked about how leadership is a relationship. Yes. And then the book ended on the concept of love. And I was
yes. I love that.
I loved that because, I right now I've learned from you and from the course that I took with you that relationships are really the foundation of success. And it's crazy because my first internship, I did an internship with a sports performance place, and the owner and I got really close. And one day he walks into the office, he's like, Hannah, if you were to define success in one word, what would it be? I said love at the time. He said you're close, but he said relationships. So then, right? So then
you're both in there, so you're both right.
Yeah. So then when I took your course and it was all, a lot about relationships, I was like, wow, this is, it's just reassuring that you have the right concept of leadership. That's awesome. So you've mentioned already that, you've had challenges, even in the roles that you've really loved.
Oh, yes.
You've had some challenges.
Oh, yes.
So if you can think, what has been your greatest challenge in the roles that you've served, if you can think of it on top of your head?
Yes, I think what it is the greatest challenge is when you move up in rank, you are still the same person, but you have you're at the top of the mountain, so you can see what's happening at the bottom of the mountain and on the ground. And people then perceive that you may be changing because now you're at a different role. You don't have to change, but I think that was hard for me to deal with, that people would look at you differently. Like, okay, now you're the big boss, and as opposed to a colleague. And I found that to be very, very challenging, because I would say I'm still me. I'm still Joyce. I'm still the same person. I have a different role, all right, and I have more accountability and responsibility, and I may look at things differently because I'm, at a higher vantage point, but I'm still me, and I think that was hard to deal with.
Yes.
Yeah.
So did it put a strain on those relationships that you're trying to build as a leader?
It might have, but what I tried to do is I tried to learn from it, like learn more about human behavior. In other words, this happens. People feel like that. They feel marginalized, or particularly if someone advances and they are part of the team and someone goes higher than
Right.
the team, then it's like, well, what's up with that person?
Right.
Why are they going up? Like,
Right.
why wasn't it me? And so it was like that. But it's just, again, over time, showing my respect, being able to listen, and putting myself in their shoes. That
Right.
is so important. I see that's key. Is, put yourself in somebody else's shoes.
Okay.
See how they might feel. They might feel intimidated or annoyed that they're the ones who didn't get advanced. And let them take time with that.
It sounds like you have mastered the listen to understand and not listen to respond. Like that's
Yes.
really hard to do, like
Right.
where you're just listening so you can respond right away instead of listening to understand where that person is coming from.
Yes.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
I think I still struggle with that at times is, because I have an opinion that comes up and I want to state it right away, and then I'm like, okay, take a breath and try to understand where they're coming from.
Well, yeah, because you're more that natural, like we talked about the great man or great woman theory. You're more like that natural born leader, so you're ready to go.
Yeah, right.
And so since I'm not, I've got to work with what I have, my ingredient, to actually listen to that. But I always like that quote: seek first to understand, and then to be understood. And sometimes I have to remind myself of that when I'm like, okay, this is not happening right now. But,
So with many challenges, I'm sure there's ones that you handled amazingly, and then I'm sure you've made mistakes throughout your career.
Oh yes.
Can you kind of pinpoint a big mistake that you made within your career but recovered from, and what you learned from it?
One of the biggest mistakes I've made is I can be impetuous. And so, meaning that I say, okay, let's do these things. And then if it doesn't happen, then I think, especially when I was younger, oh, well, this wasn't meant to be, rather than staying the course. So I did have a very good position at Cuyahoga Community College when I was a professor there. And I also had the technology business, and then I had the kids. But so I decided to go with the technology business. It wasn't a bad decision, but in some ways, I think I probably should have stayed the course with the higher ed piece of it, but maybe I didn't weigh that as correctly as I needed to.
Okay.
And because when you're younger, you kind of think, oh, you can do all these things all the time, and it's all going to work out. And I guess it did. But to be honest, if I would look back, I thought, I probably didn't put enough time and analysis into that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so on the other side of that, what do you think has been your biggest success so far? What's your greatest accomplishment so far?
Well, personally, it's just going through I came from a very troubled background as a young person, and as a result of that, I had to force myself to lead. So I think my greatest accomplishment is that I led myself out of a really poor environment and a dysfunctional environment, and became a mom to kids and a grandmother, and also had a PhD. I would have never dreamed about that because I'm first generation. My family did not go to college. They were farmers, and they didn't really. This was a different era, of course, and they didn't really appreciate college at that time. So I had to work full time and several jobs to pay for my own college education. So I think I was proud of that, all the education and just the life I've lived. And I think the biggest thing is helping young people. And that's been a joy, because young people are just young, and they're interesting, and they've got hope and dreams, and just trying to support them. So I think that's my biggest accomplishment, is just working with young people. Yeah, it's been fun. I wouldn't pick any other career. And even the business entrepreneurship, that's been fun and accomplishments, because I built businesses and won awards and things like that. I got to travel a lot. I mean, I've traveled all over the world, and that's been fun. So I guess just life. By just keep knowing you could do something and keep going.
That's awesome. Yeah. Amazing story. Now, talked about challenges, mistakes, success. Okay. Now, one thing I really learned from you during our course as well is taking risks.
Oh, yes.
So, and it can be such a scary thing to take a big risk, but it could be extremely beneficial and extremely detrimental if you don't take the risks.
Right.
So, what do you think? Can you pinpoint a very big risk that you took that was extremely beneficial to your career that you needed to take? Do you know a risk that you took that if you didn't, you wouldn't be where you were?
Well, I just will summarize and say I always take risk, because my thought process is that you learn from risk. You learn, you make mistakes, you find out more about your own ingredient, who you are, and who other people are. So I'm an advocate for that because it's real world. I think the biggest risk I took was the night that I was going to get my hair done, and it was winter, it was blizzarding outside, and I received this phone call from an odd number, and on my cell, and I picked it up, and they said the judge from Cuyahoga County is calling, and he wants to know if this wasn't the judge, but he was the judge's administrator, and would you become a president of Myers University? And I'm walking in the blizzard, and I said, yeah, I will.
I remember this.
Yeah. And I said, well, when do you need me? He goes, well, tomorrow is going to be a press conference. The media is going to be there, the TV, the radio. Okay. So,
okay, see.
All right, I got to hurry and get my hair done. Good thing. So, yeah, awesome. So that was a risk. It was a big risk, and there was a lot of tension and a lot of challenges. Yeah.
And when you take risks, do you kind of go through that thought process alone, or do you factor other people's opinions into it? Do you look for advice, or do you lead yourself through taking those risks?
I hate to say this because this is probably not what I should be saying.
No, it's real.
I kind of go with my gut.
Good.
I do. And it's because people will tell me something, and it's not that I don't listen. So here I'm kind of contradicting what I was saying before, but I'm listening to people about other things, but my own my own risk taking, I kind of know. I'm gonna do it, and it may not turn out well, but I learned something from it, and I always use everything.
Awesome.
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. That's not a wrong answer. So you already talked about listening to people. That's a key to success, and really hearing them out. What are other keys do you think that have served to your own success? If you could really say these were the keys to my success, what would they be?
I think one, and not only listening to people, but you have to accept people too. You have to know what they're all about, and accept people, and know what motivates them and what doesn't. So even in athletics, I mean, if you have a really good player, but that player gets ticked off very easily or something, and so wait a minute, if I put them there with this person who's maybe going to tick this person off, we're going to have a problem, right? So it's really about that. And the other thing is being very clear about what it is I'm trying to accomplish. I'm very clear about what I'm trying to do. And so when you're clear, just like the chef making this meal, they know what they're trying to do, they know what their expectations are, and then they see what kind of ingredients they have, and they either go, oh, forget that idea because we don't have the team to do it, or no, I need to know how to get the best out of these people. So that's what I think it is. It's clarity of vision. It's about knowing who you're working with, and having integrity, having honesty and integrity, and never saying you're going to do something and then you don't, unless you get hit by the bus. I always say that. If you get hit by the bus, okay, but other than that, you don't make commitments to people. So I found that is, helpful. Because dealing with people, it's challenging. Yeah, it really, it's not for the faint of heart after a while. Leading, yes.
Talking about qualities, those are the key factors that you believe have served in your own success. Think about the leaders you see today, or the aspiring leaders, and the challenges that the world brings in today.
Yes.
Probably different from what you had to face when you were growing up.
Oh, yes.
So what do you think the biggest challenge is that leaders today are facing?
Distraction.
Yes,
distraction, because it's so much easier to get distracted from your purpose, distracted from knowing who you are and your own ingredient, distracted from then really being clear on your vision. Just like with you started to develop this vision about what you wanted to do with leadership and with sports and with helping others. So you had it all already before you came here, but once you did, you started seeing a path. You started seeing that. So with you had a purpose, and so you're not distracted. But if you don't, or you're kind of wandering, it's so easy to waste time, to get distracted, And it's really about energy management today, not just time management like back in the old day, but it's about how you manage your energy. And when you get distracted, your energy wanes and it's difficult to advance.
Never heard that before, energy management, but I like it. What's your best advice to combat that?
I really think is to be grateful and really understand the finite element of life. Because when you're young, you don't think like that. It's like, you take everything for granted because who doesn't? Because you're young. But if there is a way to say every day, this is a unique day. This day means something. And so reminding yourself and trying to always keep that top of mind. What am I doing? How am I spending my time? And really reflecting. That's called metacognition. You're thinking about your own cognition, not to go too much, because there's a fine line in everything, where if we start thinking too much about ourselves and what we're doing, after a while, that's as bad as getting distracted. I mean, it's like two ends of a continuum. So I would just suggest that you just keep reminding yourself to be thankful and grateful and really understand you have power. You have so much power in living in the U.S. to become what you want to become. So I just really reinforce that. Just don't waste time.
Right.
Yeah.
So you mentioned sports earlier, and you and I have talked about this before. We've talked about how sports and business can kind of work together, and how the business world could benefit from a sport-like approach in leadership. Can you kind of go into detail about that and explain why you think that may be beneficial, especially with the challenges that leaders and businesses are facing?
Yes. All right. I feel that this is important, and I want to just back up for one moment and just frame this as people might say, well, athletics and sporting is going through challenges as well, corruption or these kinds of things that are negative. However, I'm going under the premise, I look at what is right, not just what is wrong, because it's easy to track and follow that, but what is right in sports, what's right in athletics? Well, what's right is there's a clear vision. You know that you're trying to win a game, right? Or a tournament, or some sort of conference, or whatever it may be. So you already know that, right? And the other thing is, your team members, you know what they're capable of or what they're not. Again, that whole idea about an ingredient. So you know that. Well, in business, what's happened is oftentimes we're working in a business, we don't really know what is the vision, what is the mission, what are we really trying to do? Departments are siloed, so it's almost like having offensive members in a football game. They don't know anything about the defense. Well, no, you ought to know, even though you're playing different sides. And the same thing in the business world. We're in departments, we're siloed, we don't know what the real end game is, we don't know what the vision is, and then we don't have clarity of our goals, nor as respect for our teammates, because we don't know what position they're playing, where we do in sports. So I think that the same thing I will say about leaders. We get distracted in business, we lack focus. There are many challenges today. Everything's getting much more automated. So the human interface is really important. So that's why I say we could take a page out of all kinds of athletics and sports to really use that in the business world and get people on the same page better than we do. Yeah,
and that's what I'm really trying to communicate to the athletes I work with is, sports, the game itself is so temporary, but you are going to acquire skills, knowledge. You're going to go through experiences of, being in a team culture that you are going to be able to apply to business. So start thinking about that now, because when you sit down in an interview, I think, in their first interview, they're going to think about when the interviewer says, what experience have you had? What challenges have you gone through? How have you shown leadership? So they don't always think about their sport and how they can rely back to that and say, this is what I've done. Like that is part of your experience.
No, that's it. Absolutely right. So it's interesting because oftentimes students, and just going back to students, they might learn something in this class, English, but then they don't apply the same rules to the business writing. And that's how human beings are. We learn something, but we don't apply it to another sector. And that's particularly true, like you said, with athletics. And what they've learned is team building and culture. That's something I didn't mention about the business world, but that's the same kind of thing. We need to build this kind of team-oriented culture. So if you've done it in athletics, you can do it in business, and you can leverage that, and then people can relate, because once you start, most people, even if they're not an athlete themselves, they participate in sports or go to the games or something, and so that'll resonate. So you're forming that bond, creating that relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So now we're going to take a little bit of a shift, and we're going to go into a little bit of your perspective on women in leadership. So when I finished my capstone for the MBA program, you know, I was talking about beyond, and so my focus was more on, you know, athletics, and I looked into some statistics of women in leadership within the NCAA, Division I through Division III, and the percentages were very low.
Oh, okay.
Very low. Not surprising.
No, right,
you know?
right.
And I'm sure I can't say what the statistics are for other, you know, professions, but I'm sure they're similar.
Yes.
So that being said, you know, how do you manage to assert your dominance as a woman in a leadership position? How do you do that?
Well, first, let me just add one point to this, which is, so women's role in leadership varies all across the world, correct? And so one thing, again, I appreciate being in the U.S. where women can advance more readily than maybe some other countries, you know, okay?
Right.
So that's true. However, to your point with NCAA and the amount of women in leadership, or the amount of women that are serving on boards or in high-level positions, there's still a disconnect, correct?
Right.
So as far as how do I assert my dominance, well, it's first of all, you've got to know when to assert it and know when not to. I've seen women that do not have a filter. They only assert dominance, and in the end, it'll backfire. And it could backfire on a guy too, but since we're just talking about women, so it can backfire. So I'll give you a prime example. So I was thinking about this, and years ago, I was like 7.5 months pregnant, so I was out to here with my daughter, and I was teaching a small business entrepreneurship class. And there was a gentleman, an older gentleman, about 50, and he had, you know, owned 7 businesses or something. And whenever I talked about corporations or subchapter S was just coming on the market at that time, and LLCs, and he would try to, you know, outdo me. So with that, I had to be very dominant, very assertive, because I knew I looked anything but. I looked, you know, like, okay. So I was very assertive. And then, for example, going back to the taking risks in this very example, so I was called by a radio station, and at that time there was a popular radio, you know, everybody knew him, his name was Larry Morrow, and he wanted to know if I would come on the radio and talk about subchapter S corporations, LLC. So I did that. So the next Tuesday, when I was facing this 50-year-old with his business, you know, I just said, yeah, well, just like when I was interviewed last week on Larry Morrow about this very topic. So sometimes, like, you had to rein him in. I wasn't going to put up with that. So right away, you have to discern if you are being treated in a differential way that you cannot accept. So you have to be dominant, and they have to know that you're dominant, and you're not going to back down. It's like an animal, you know, you cannot back down. You have to be dominant. But on other cases, you have to know when not to control. So when I became the interim president, I was dealing with the court and the judges and all these people. Oh my, these people, they were using F-bombs, swearing like all the time. I mean, this is their culture. This is what they were like. So then I had to make a choice. Am I going to say, oh, please don't do that. Don't use F-bomb in front of me. You know, I'm this little one. I can deal with this. This is their culture. I came into their culture for a very brief period of time, and I am not going to, you know, be dominant in this role. I had to accept it. See? So you just have to know. But if you're leading, you can't have any lack of confidence and not be dominant. They must know you're in charge, but you don't have to just come off like, you know, guns a-blazing or something like that, right? Okay, so just to be clear.
Very good advice, very good advice. So have you the example you just used kind of showed, you know, sometimes people, maybe he was a little intimidated by the fact that you're a strong leader. I was kind of trying to put you down. Other times, I'm sure you've experienced resistance from people, just, you know, kind of, you know, giving you the cold shoulder, or, you know, just completely neglecting what you're saying. You know, how do you manage that resistance that you sometimes probably have to encounter?
That's a very good question, because I think it just varies depending on who it is. Because first of all, you know, it tells me something. It tells me either something about the individual, their ingredient, their character, or it tells me there was something that maybe I could have handled better. So it's either one of two things. So I use different approaches. That's the one thing to leadership. One size does not fit all.
Right.
And so I will reach out, but then again, I won't reach out. It really depends on the person and all that, because sometimes you have to write it off and say, you know what, there's nothing else I can do in this situation. And you can't stew on it too much. That's the thing. But if you know you're wrong, if you know that they're not speaking or they're not following up because it was something that you did, and so you have to really think about it, then you should reach out. But also women, you have to be careful. I mean, I do this naturally. I'll say, I'm sorry if I caused somebody to spend time unnecessarily or wasted their time or gave them the wrong information. I just naturally say, I'm sorry, but somebody else can perceive that as weakness, right? Like, oh, that's weakness, so I can control. No, you can't control me. Right. People cannot control me. Right. I control myself. But still they think that because there's this, apology or whatever, because I'm empathetic. Yeah. But I hope I answered your question.
No, you definitely did. No, you definitely did.
Okay, all right.
So, if you have some advice, you've given so much, you said you have to let people you're in charge, know when to assert your dominance and know when to reel it back a little bit. Is there any other advice that you would give to women or just anybody that may struggle to assert their dominance within starting their own company or within the company they work for? What's your best advice to assert that dominance and get the respect from coworkers?
I think you have to start practicing it. All right, that's what I want to say. Just like if you're playing tennis, you got to practice anything. So you have to practice asserting your dominance. And so it can be in small ways. I like to use the Kaizen approach. It's a Japanese technique for introducing incremental changes to yourself. So if you're not one to actually speak out, do a little bit. It might be in class. It might be to your coach or your colleague that you're playing a sport with, and say, no, that wasn't okay. Try these little things. Start building up, or with your best friend, or your mom. Something where you could start speaking out, and then get the reaction. They might get angry. They might say, oh, because if you're not used to, here's the problem: when you're not used to speaking out, and you suddenly speak out, oh no! I mean, people are, they're going to be more angry than if you're always speaking out and you're always dominant. They accept that.
Right.
So I would suggest, if you are not dominant and you're afraid of speaking out, start practicing right now, because this will never help you in life. It won't. It will not. You'll be hiding how you really feel. You will not be authentic, and you're gonna have a challenge. So just start practicing, I would say. Just do it right now. Small little things, even like, even if you get the wrong order at, a drive-through, just say, excuse me, this is not, you don't have to be mean about it, but assert yourself.
That's a great example though, because that happens a lot.
Yeah.
Like, where's my sauce?
Right. Like, okay. And again, you don't have to be hateful, but just assert yourself.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. I mean, even at restaurants, I'm not the one to get mad at the waiter or the waitress.
Right.
If there's, because what I recognize, I'm like, if there's a mistake with the food, maybe they communicated it incorrectly, or the chef made the mistake. Right. But I'm always like, okay. Like there's been times I've gone to a restaurant and the chicken, is undercooked. So I'm like, I don't want to make them feel bad, but I do need to let them know, like, obviously, I can't eat this. This is unacceptable to serve this.
Yes.
But
yes.
I would just appreciate it if you give me a better one.
That's right. No, and you're handling it very nice. So there's no reason to add negative, bad energy or karma to the world. But get that corrected. And I've been with other people that do the opposite. They're so picky, and it's like, oh my, come on. And I say sometimes this is a first world problem.
Yeah. Like, as if this is
like
what
my French fries are cold. Okay. All right. So.
I say the same thing. Awesome. So now we're just kind of gonna shift gears and ask you, let's go back to you being 25 years old. What would you tell yourself at 25?
I would say, just keep on going at age 25, because when I was age 25, I had this position as a supervisor at a bank. I knew nothing about this operation. It was all about microfilm and microfiche. I knew nothing, but I studied about it in the library, and I got the job somehow. I was 25 and I had all these older ladies reporting to me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I doing? So I kind of hid off in my office and tried to study some more about their machines. I don't know. So, but I would keep going with it. And then I met with a lawyer. And again, I was just started this job, and I met with this lawyer, and she started looking at her watch. And so I don't know where I got this from, but again, this is about speaking up. And I said, her name was Linda. And I said, excuse me, Linda, is this a bad time for you? Because it is. We can just reschedule.
Mm-hmm.
But I said it very clear, very dominant, because she perceived me as this young underling with this like little department in the basement or something. And so I just spoke right up. So I would tell myself, keep going. But the one thing I would advise my 25-year-old self is stick with things. Don't start so many initiatives, because I start so many things, and stick with start with fewer things and finish what you start. I would tell my 25-year-old self.
Nice.
Yeah.
I'm noting that down.
Mm-hmm.
I'm noting it down.
Yeah.
So, and you have already mentioned about how you continue to grow and learn as a leader, but kind of go into more detail here. Like, what do you see for what's next for you? You know what I mean? Like, if you look at the next 5-10 years, what do you see yourself doing as a leader? What does that look like?
Well, right now I'm in a role as being the MBA director at Notre Dame College. So I really feel very strongly committed to the program and making it a very unique program and bringing more people involved that actually can help our students to give them a leg up. So I'm very committed to that. But I think also I'm as a leader today, I'm really involved in my faith. I have a very strong faith. And I want to do things that will help people in the world, like in leadership in different ways, like more like leadership coaching, and not getting up on the stage and all that, but just like one-on-one, just like we're doing, Hannah, just one-on-one, just because you know what it is in the world today, people they want to feel a sense of belonging. They want to know that people care. They want to see a hope in the future, and that they too can become a leader, or they can change their lives for the positive. And I think that if I could serve in that kind of role, that would be the best, just kind of focus on that. And so that's why I really appreciate that you asked me to have an interview here, because it made me actually think about all these things and leadership in the past. So I just hope to make it stronger, better, and more helpful to individuals, not just
you
for
definitely
my career.
are doing that.
Oh,
You're
well,
definitely doing that.
Thank you.
And I think we live in the influencer era.
Yes.
And social media, it's crazy because you go on there and they say I'm an influencer, and all they do is post pictures of them on vacation. It's like, okay,
I'm like, I want to go on that vacation right now too.
Thank you.
Yes,
but I think you are the influencer that we need to be looking at. You truly are an influencer. You're doing things to help people reach goals and better the world and better their lives, not just telling us you're getting on a jet to go to the Bahamas or something.
Right. Although that doesn't sound bad.
Yeah, it doesn't sound bad. But we really, I really appreciate you taking the time, to tell us more about your story, to give us insight to your perspective. I learned from you even more today, and I hope, I know they're going to learn from you, but you're truly inspiring, and I'm excited to see what you do next. Because I'll be in your corner.
Oh, thank you. No, I'm so excited that you're doing this, and you're actually making your dream come true, and it just shows you can. With hard work and the kind of personality that you have. You're a leader. You're a leader.
Well, that's all we have. So, like I said, thank you so much.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah.